Continuing Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain. This was the beginning. Neighbor after neighbor of both sexes followed, and the procession drifted in and out all evening, and all Wednesday and Thursday. The letter was read and reread until it was nearly worn out. Everybody admired its courtly and gracious tone and smooth and practiced style. Everybody was sympathetic and excited, and the Coopers were steeped in happiness all the while. The boats were very uncertain in low water in these primitive times. This time, the Thursday boat had not arrived at 10 at night, so the people had waited at the landing all day for nothing. They were driven to their homes by a heavy storm without having had a view of the illustrious foreigners. 11 o'clock came, and the Cooper house was the only one in the town that still had lights burning. The rain and thunder were booming yet, and the anxious family were still waiting, still hoping. At last there was a knock at the door, and the family jumped to open it. 2 Negro men entered, each carrying a trunk, and proceeding upstairs toward the guest room. Then entered the twins, the handsomest, the best dressed, the most distinguished-looking pair of young fellows the West had ever seen. One was a little fairer than the other, but otherwise they were exact duplicates. Chapter 6. Swimming in Glory. Let us endeavor so to live that we come to die. Even the undertaker will be sorry. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. Habit is habit, and not to be flung out of the window by any man, but coaxed downstairs a step at a time. Pudd'nhead Wilson's calendar. At breakfast in the morning, the twins' charm of manner and easy and polished bearing made speedy conquest of the family's good graces. All constraint and formality quickly disappeared, and the friendliest feeling succeeded. Aunt Patsy called them by their Christian names almost from the beginning. She was full of the keenest curiosity about them, and showed it. They responded by talking about themselves, which pleased her greatly. It presently appeared that in their early youth they had known poverty and hardship. As the talk wandered along, the old lady watched for the right place to drop in a question or two concerning that matter, and when she found it, she said to the blonde twin, who was now doing the biographies in his turn, while the brunette one rested, "If it ain't asking what I ought not to ask, Mr. Angelo, how did you come to be so friendless and in such trouble when you were little? Do you mind telling? But don't if you do." "Oh, we don't mind it at all, madame. In our case, it was merely misfortune and nobody's fault. Our parents were well-to-do. They're in Italy, and we were their only child. We were of the old Florentine nobility." Rowena's heart gave a loud bound, her nostrils expanded, and a fine light played in her eyes. "And when the war broke out, my father was on the losing side and had to fly for his life. His estates were confiscated, his personal property seized, and there we were in Germany, strangers, friendless, and in fact paupers. My brother and I were 10 years old and well educated for that age, very studious, very fond of our books, and well grounded in the German, French, Spanish, and English languages. Also, we were marvelous musical prodigies, if you will allow me to say it, it being only the truth. Our father survived his misfortunes only a month. Our mother soon followed him, and we were alone in the world." Now, a musical prodigy might not be the popular music, so they, our father survived his misfortunes only a month. Our mother soon followed him, and we were alone in the world. Our parents could have made themselves comfortable by exhibiting us as a show, and they had many and large offers, but the thought revolted their pride, and they said they would starve and die first. But what they wouldn't consent to do, we had to do without the formality of consent. We were seized for the debts occasioned by their illness and their funerals, and placed among the attractions of a cheap museum in Berlin to earn the liquidation money. It took us 2 years to get out of that slavery. We traveled all about Germany, receiving no wages, and not even our keep. We had to be exhibited for nothing and beg our bread. Well, madame, the rest is not of much consequence. When we escaped from that slavery at 12 years of age, we were in some respects men. Experience had taught us some valuable things about others, how to take care of ourselves, how to avoid and defeat sharks and sharpers, and how to conduct our own business for our own profit and without other people's help. We traveled everywhere, years and years, picking up smatterings of strange tongues, familiarizing ourselves with strange sights and strange customs, accumulating an education of a wide and varied and curious sort. It was a pleasant life. We went to Venice, to London, Paris, Russia, India, China, Japan. At this point, Nancy, the slave woman, thrust her head in at the door and exclaimed, "All miss us. The house is plum jam full of people, and they's just a spittlin' to see the gentlemen." She indicated the twins with a nod of her head and tucked it back out of sight again. Now, did they tell the slaves to talk like that? Is that why they're representing them like that? Sometimes languages or parts of languages carried on in slavery, so it was a proud occasion for the widow, and she promised herself high satisfaction in showing off her fine foreign birds before neighbors and friends, simple folk who had hardly ever seen a foreigner of any kind, and never one of any distinction or style. Yet her feeling was moderate indeed when she contrasted with Rowena. Rowena was in the clouds. She walked on air. This was to be the greatest day, the most romantic episode in the colorless history of that dull country town. She was to be familiarly near the source of its glory, and feel the full flood of it pour over her and about her. The other girls could only gaze and envy, not partake. The widow was ready, Rowena was ready, so also were the foreigners. The party moved along the hall, the twins in advance, and entered the open parlor door, whence issued a low hum of conversation. The twins took a position near the door. The window stood at Luigi's side, Rowena stood beside Angelo, and the march past the introductions began. The window was all smiles and contentment. She received the procession and passed it on to Rowena. "Good morning, Sister Cooper," handshake. "Good morning, Brother Higgins." Count Luigi Capello, Mr. Higgins, handshake followed by a devouring stare. "And I'm glad to see you" on the part of Higgins, and a courteous inclination of the head, and a pleasant "most happy" on the part of Count Luigi. "Good morning, Rowena," handshake. "Good morning, Mr. Higgins, present." "You to Count Angelo Capello, handshake, admiring stare. "Glad to see." Courteous nod, smiling. "Most happy." And Higgins passes on. None of these visitors was at ease, but being honest people, they didn't pretend to be. None of them had ever seen a person bearing the title of nobility before, and none had been expecting to see one now. Consequently, the title came upon them as a kind of pile-driving surprise and caught them unprepared. A few tried to rise to the emergency, and got out an awkward "my lord" or "your lordship," to something of that sort, but the great majority were overwhelmed by the unaccustomed word and its dim and awful associations with the gilded courts and stately ceremony and anointed kingship. So they only fumbled through the handshake and passed on speechless. Now and then, as happens at all receptions everywhere, a more than ordinarily friendly soul blocked the procession and kept it waiting while he inquired how the brothers liked the village, and how long they were going to stay, and that their families were well, and dragged in the weather, and hoped it would get cooler soon, and all that sort of thing, so as to be able to say, when they got home, I had quite a long talk with them, but nobody did or said anything of a regrettable kind. And so the great affair went through to the end in a creditable and satisfactory fashion. General conversations followed, and the twins drifted about from group to group, talking easily and fluently and winning approval, compelling admiration and achieving favor from all. The widow followed their conquering march with a proud eye, and every now and then Rowena said to herself with deep satisfaction, and to think they are ours, all ours. There were no idle moments for mother or daughter. Eager inquiries concerning the twins were pouring into their enchanted ears all the time. Each was the constant center of a group of breathless listeners. Each recognized that she knew not, for the first time, the real meaning of that great word, glory, and perceived the stupendous value of it, and understood why men in all ages had been willing to throw away meaner happiness's treasure, life itself, to get a taste of its sublime and supreme joy. Napoleon and all his kind stood accounted for and justified. When Rowena had at last done all her duty by the people in the parlor, she went upstairs to satisfy the longings of an overflow meeting there, for the parlor was not big enough to hold all the corners. Again she was besieged by eager questioners, and again she swam in sunset seas of glory. When the forenoon was nearly gone, she recognized with a pang that this most splendid episode of her life was almost over, that nothing could prolong it, and that nothing quite its equal could ever fall to her fortune again. But never mind. It was sufficient unto itself. The grand occasion had moved on an ascending scale from the start, and was a noble and memorable success. If the twins could but do some crowning act, and now climax it, something unusual, something startling, something to concentrate upon themselves, the company's loftiest admiration, something in the nature of an electric surprise. Here a prodigious slam-banging broke out, and everybody rushed down to see it. It was the twins knocking out a classic four-handed piece on the piano in great style. Rowena was satisfied down to the bottom of her heart. The young strangers were kept long at the piano. The villagers were astonished and enchanted with the magnificence of their performance, and could not bear to have them stop. All the music that they ever had heard before seemed spiritless prentice work, and barren of grace or charm, when compared with these intoxicating floods of melodious sound. They realized that for once in their lives they were hearing masters. Chapter 7. The Unknown Nymph. One of the most striking differences between a cat and a lie is that a cat has only 9 lives. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. The company broke up reluctantly and drifted toward their several homes, chatting with vivacity, and all agreeing that it would be many a long day before Dawson's Landing would see the equal of this one again. The twins had accepted several invitations while the reception was in progress, and had also volunteered to play some duets at an amateur entertainment for the benefit of a local charity. Society was eager to receive them to its bosom. Judge Driscoll had the good fortune to secure them for an immediate drive, and to be the first to display them in public. They entered his buggy with him, and were paraded down the main street, everybody flocking to the windows and sidewalks to see. The judge showed the strangers the new graveyard and the jail where the richest man lived, and the Freemasons' Hall, and the Methodist Church, and the Presbyterian Church, where the Baptist Church was going to be when they got some money to build it with, and showed them the town hall and the slaughterhouse, and got out the independent fire in company in uniform, and had them put out an imaginary fire. Then he let them inspect the muskets of the militia company, and poured out an exhaustless stream of enthusiasm all over all these splendors, and seemed very well satisfied with the responses he got, for the twins admired his admiration, and paid him back the best they could, though they could have done better at if some 15 or 1600,000 previous experiences of this sort in various countries had not already rubbed off a considerable part of the nobility of it. Well, how many seconds do you go through in a day? The judge laid himself out hospitality to make them have a good time, and if there was a defect anywhere, it was not his fault. He told them a good many humorous anecdotes, and always forgot the nub, but they were always able to furnish it, for these yarns were of a pretty early vintage, and they had many a rejuvenating pull at them before, and he told them all about his several dignities, and how he had held this or that and the other place of honor or profit, and had once been to the legislature, and was now president of the Society of Freethinkers. He said the society had been in existence 4 years and already had 2 members, and was firmly established. He would call for the brothers in the evening if they would like to attend a meeting of it. Accordingly, he called for them, and on the way he told them all about Pudd'nhead Wilson, in order that they might get a favorable impression of him in advance, and be prepared to like him. This scheme succeeded. The favorable impression was achieved. Latter, it was confirmed and solidified when Wilson proposed that out of courtesy to the strangers, the usual topics be put aside, and the hour be devoted to conversation upon ordinary subjects and the cultivation of friendly relations and good fellowship, a proposition which was put to vote and carried. The hour passed quickly away in lively talk, and when it was ended, the lonesome and neglected Wilson was richer by 2 friends than he had been when it began. He invited the twins to look in at his lodgings presently after disposing of an intervening engagement, and they accepted with pleasure. Toward the middle of the evening they found themselves on the road to his house. Pudd'nhead was at home, waiting for them and putting in his time, puzzling over a thing which had come under his notice that morning. The matter was this. He happened to be up very early at dawn, in fact, and he crossed the hall which divided his cottage through the center and entered a room to get something there. The window of the room had no curtains, for that side of the house had long been unoccupied, and through this window he caught the sight of something which surprised and interested him. It was a young woman where properly no young woman belonged, for she was in Judge Driscoll's house, and in the bedroom over the judge's private study or sitting room. This was young Tom Driscoll's bedroom. He and the judge's widowed sister, Miss Pratt, and 3 Negro servants were the only people who belonged in the house. Who then might this young lady be? The 2 houses were separated by an ordinary yard, with a low fence running back through its middle from the street in front to the lane in the rear. The distance was not great, and Wilson was able to see the girl very well, the window shades of the room she was in being up, and the window also. The girl had on a neat and trim summer dress, patterned in broad strips of pink and white, and her bonnet was equipped with a pink veil. She was practicing steps, gaits, and attitudes, apparently. She was doing the thing gracefully, and was very much absorbed in her work. Who could she be, and how came she to be in young Tom Driscoll's room? Wilson had quickly chosen a position from which he could watch the girl without running much risk of being seen by her, and he remained there, hoping she would raise her veil and betray her face. But she disappointed him. After a matter of 20 minutes she disappeared, and although he stayed at his post half an hour longer, she came no more. Toward noon he dropped in at the judge's and talked with Miss Pratt about the great event of the day, the levee of the distinguished foreigners at Aunt Patsy's Cooper's. He asked after her nephew Tom, and she said that he was on his way home, and that she was expecting him to arrive a little before night. We're on page 666 of this book here, so that's something to point out, right? He added that she and the judge were gratified to gather from his letters that he was conducting himself very nicely and creditably, at which Wilson winked to himself privately. Wilson did not ask if there was a newcomer in the house, but he asked questions that would have brought light-throwing answers. As to that matter, if Miss Pratt had any light to throw, so he went away satisfied that he knew of things that were going on in her house of which she herself was not aware. He was now waiting for the twins, and still puzzling over the problem of who that girl might be, and how she happened to be in that young fellow's room at daybreak in the morning. Chapter 8. Marse Tom Tramples His Chance. The holy passion of friendship is of so sweet and steady and loyal and enduring a nature that it will last through a whole lifetime if not asked to lend money. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Well, people should always withhold themselves from asking for what they want when it comes to things like that. What you need is a different story. Consider well the proportions of things. It is better to be a young June bug than an old bird of paradise. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. It is necessary now to hunt up Roxy. At the time she was set free and went away chambermaiding. She was 35. She got a berth as a second chambermaid on a Cincinnati boat in the New Orleans trade. The Grand Mogul, a couple of trips, made her wanted, easygoing at the work, and infatuated with her with the stir and adventure and independence of steamboat life. Then she was promoted and became a head chambermaid. She was favorable with the officers and exceedingly proud of their joking and friendly ways with her. During 8 years, she served 3 parts of the year on that boat and the winters on a Vicksburg packet. But now, for 2 months, she had rheumatism in her arms and was obliged to let the wash tub alone. So she resigned, and she was well fixed, rich as she would have described it, for she had lived a steady life and had banked $4 every month in New Orleans as a provision for her old age. She said in the start that she had put shoes on one barefooted Negro to trample on her with, and that one mistake like that was enough. She would be independent of the human race, thenceforth, forevermore, if hard work and economy could accomplish it. When the boat had touched the levee at New Orleans, she bade goodbye to her comrades on the Grand Mogul and moved her kit ashore. But she was back in an hour. The bank had gone to smash and carried her $400 with it. She was a pauper and homeless, also disabled bodily, at least for the present. The officers were full of sympathy for her in her trouble, and made up a little purse for her. She resolved to go to her birthplace. She had friends there among the Negroes, and the unfortunate always helped the unfortunate. She was well aware of that. Those lowly comrades of her youth would not let her starve. She took the little local packet at Cairo, and now she was on the home stretch. Time had worn away her bitterness against her son, and she was able to think of him with serenity. She put the vile side of him out of her mind, and dwelt only on recollections of his occasional acts of kindness to her. She gilded and otherwise decorated these, and made them very pleasant to contemplate. She began to long to see him. She would go and fawn upon him. Slave-like for this would have to be her attitude, of course, and maybe she would find that time had modified him, and that he would be glad to see his forgotten old nurse and treat her gently. That would be lovely, and would make her forget her woes and her poverty. That thought inspired her to add another castle to her dream. Maybe he would give her a trifle now and then, and maybe $1 once a month. Say, any little thing like that would help. Ever so much. By the time she reached Dawson's Landing, she was her old self again. Her blues were gone. She was in high feather. She would get along surely. There were many kitchens where servants would share their meals with her, and also steal sugar and apples and other dainties for her to carry home, or give her a chance to pilfer them herself, which would answer just as well. And there was the church. She was a more rabid and devoted Methodist than ever, and her piety was no sham, but she was strong and sincere, yes, with plenty of creature comforts, and her old place in the Amen corner in her possession again. She would be perfectly happy and at peace thenceforward to the end. Well, of course, there's more to being devoted to a religion than the churchy part. She went to Judge Driscoll's kitchen. First of all, she was received there in great form and with vast enthusiasm. Her wonderful travels and the strange countries she had seen and the adventures she had had made her a marvel and a heroine of romance. The negroes hung enchanted upon the great story of her experiences, interrupting her all along with eager questions and laughter and exclamations of delight and expressions of applause, and she was obliged to confess to herself that if there was anything better in this world than steamboating, it was the glory to be got by telling about it. The audience loaded her stomach with their dinners, and then stole the pantry bare to load up her basket. Tom was in St. Louis. The servants said he had spent the best part of his time there during the previous 2 years. Roxy came about every day and had many talks about the family and its affairs. Once she asked why Tom was away so much. Ostensible Chambers said, "The fact is, old Marster kin get along better when young Marster's away than he kin when he's in the town. Yes, and he love him better too. He gives him $50 a month." No, is that so? Chambers, you're joking, ain't you? At one point, you could get by with $50 a year. So, cloud of goodness, I ain't, mammy. Marse Tom told me so his own self, but na mind to ain't enough. My Ian, what the reason to ain't enough? Well, I's gwine to tell you if you give me a chance, mammy. The reason it ain't enough is case Marse Tom gambles. Roxy threw up her hands in astonishment, and Chambers went on. Old Marster found it out. Case he had to pay $200 for Marse Tom's gambling debts, and that's true, mommy, just as dead certain as you's born. $200? Why, what is you talking about? $200? Sakes alive! It's most enough to buy a tolerable good second-hand Negro with. Ain't you lying, honey? You wouldn't lie to your old mammy. It's God's own truth, just as I tell you. $200. I wished I may never stir out of my tracks if it ain't so. Ain't my land Mars was just a hoppin'. He was a bit illin' mad, I tell you. He tuck in discerneret him. He licked his chops with relish after that stately word. Roxy struggled with it a moment and gave it up and said, "Doesn't witched him? Doesn't hurt it him? What's that? What do it mean?" "Means he busted the will." "Busted the will? He wouldn't ever treat him so. Take it back, you miserable imitation Negro that I bore in sorrow and tribulation." Roxy's pet castle, an occasional dollar from Tom's pocket, was tumbling to ruin before her eyes. She could not abide such a disaster as that. She could not endure the thought of it. Her remark amused Chambers. "Ya, just listen to that. If I's imitation, what is you? Both of us imitation, why, that's what we is, and powerful good imitation too. Ya. We don't amount to nothing as imitation Negroes. As for..." "Shut up, you foolin', for I knock you side the head and tell me about the will. Tell me to ain't busted, do honey, and I never forget you. Well, 'tain't cause there's a new one made in Marse Tom's all right again, but what is you in such a sweet bout for it, mammy? 'Tain't none of your business, I don't reckon. 'Tain't none of my business. Whose business is it then? I'd like to know, was I his mother? Tell he was 15 years old, or wasn't I? You answer me that. And you spec I could see him turned out po en ornery on the world and never cared nothing about it. I reckon if you ever been a mother yourself, that at the chambers you wouldn't talk such foolishness as that. Well then, old Marcy forgave him, and fixed up. They will again do that satisfy you. Yes, she was satisfied now, and quite happy and sentimental over it. She kept coming daily. At last she was told that Tom had come home. She began to tremble with emotion, and let his po o negro mammy have just one sight of him and die for joy. I'm changing a word that's become hate speech, because the word being used typically, well, I mean, it can be literally used as a reference to all you are is black or something, but it's not a word to be using, basically. So, Tom was stretched at his lazy ease on a sofa when Chambers brought the petition. Time had not modified his ancient detestation of the humble drudge and protector of his boyhood. It was still bitter and uncompromising. He sat up and bent a severe gaze upon the fair face of the young fellow whose name he was unconsciously using and whose family rights he was enjoying. He maintained the gaze until the victim of it had become satisfactorily pallid with terror, and then he said, "What does the old rip want with me?" The petition was meekly repeated. "Who gave you permission to come and disturb me with the social attentions of Negroes?" Tom had risen. The other young man was trembling now, visibly, and saw what was coming, and bent his head sideways and put up his left arm to shield it. Tom rained cuffs upon the head and its shield, saying no word. The victim received each blow with a beseeching, "Please, Marse Tom. Oh, please, Marse Tom." 7 blows. Then Tom said, "Face the door, march." He followed behind with 1, 2, 3 solid kicks. The last one helped the pure white slave over the door sill, and he limped away, mopping his eyes with his old ragged sleeve. Tom shouted after him, "Send her in." Then he flung himself panting on the sofa again. He rasped out the remark, "He arrived just at the right moment. I was full to the brim with bitter thinkings, and nobody to think it out of. How refreshing it was, and I feel better." Tom's mother entered now, closing the door behind her, and approached her son with all the wheedling and supplicating servilities that fear and interest can impart to the words and attitudes of born slave. She stopped a yard from her boy and made 2 or 3 admiring exclamations over his manly stature and general handsomeness, and Tom put an arm under his head and hoisted a leg over the sofa back in order to look properly indifferent. "My land, how you is growed, honey. Cloud of goodness. I wouldn't knowed you, Marse Tom. 'Deed I wouldn't. Look at me good. Does you remember old Roxy? Does you know your old Negro mammy, honey? Well, now I kin. Lay down and die in peace, 'cause I's seed. Cut it short. Cut it short. What is it you want? You hear that? Just the same old Marse Tom, always so gay and funnin'. While the old mammy, I us just as sure. Cut it short, I tell you, and get along. What do you want?" This was a bitter disappointment. Roxy had for so many days nursed and fondled and petted her notion that Tom would be glad to see his old nurse, and would make her proud and happy to the morrow, with a cordial word or two, that it took 2 rebuffs to convince her that he was not funnin', and that her beautiful dream was a fond and foolish vanity, a shabby and pitiful mistake. She was hurt to the heart, and so ashamed for a moment that she did not quite know what to do or how to act. Of course, slaves should be treated with dignity, and I include slaves of this state, whether they actually did something wrong or not, among that. And this nonsense where you refer to people like they have no human value other than, like, their human body, the color of their skin, that sort of stuff. It's good they're not doing that so much anymore, but what is that body beautiful movement and all that stuff about anyways if it's not for that?